Happy October! To kick off my October content, I thought I'd start with something a little different. Today I'll be talking about Australia's 10 worst serial killers. Like many out there, I have a morbid fascination with serial killers and have watched many a crime documentary on them, not because I admire them, but because I strive to understand how a person can be so sadistic and depraved, because it's so far removed from my own thinking. We've heard many stories about Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and more, but being Australian, I thought I'd focus on the names from my own backyard. So here are Australia's 10 worst serial killers. Number 10, Claremont serial killer. It is believed the Claremont serial killer murdered at least 3 people in Perth in the mid-90s. All victims were last seen in night spots in Perth's well-heeled Claremont. The first woman who disappeared was Sarah Spires, 18, on January 27, 1996. She was last seen waiting for a taxi on a main road. Her body has never been found. Jane Rimmer, 23, disappeared on June 9th that year, and her body was found nearly 2 months later in Bushland. On March 14, 1997, lawyer Ciara Glennon, 27, disappeared from Claremont, and her semi-clothed body was found on April 3rd. Following one of Western Australia's biggest investigations, Perth Telstra technician Bradley Robert Edwards, 48, was arrested in 2017 over the murders. He has yet to stand trial. 9. Peter Dupas. Australian Peter Dupas had a long, sad history of violence against women by the time he murdered Nicole Patterson, 29, in Melbourne. Dupas had previously been convicted of numerous sex offences between 1974 and 1994, including rape, false imprisonment, and assault with intent to rape. His crimes became more violent each time he was released back into society. On March 19, 1999, Dupas posed as a potential client and visited Patterson at her Northcote home, which also housed her psychiatric office, for a scheduled appointment. He instead killed the woman, stabbing her 27 times. Arrested and convicted in the Patterson killing, Dupas was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Justice Frank Vincent addressed Dupas saying,
"I doubt you are capable of remorse,"
and assessing their chances of rehabilitation stated they were
so close to hopeless they can effectively be dismissed.
Dupas is a major suspect in several other Melbourne killings, including the murder of Messina Halvagas, who was stabbed to death while visiting her grandmother's grave. Margaret Mayher, who was also stabbed to death in October of 1997, is also a likely victim. Another strong possibility is the murder of Helen McMahon in February of 1983, which took place in almost the exact same spot that Dupas had previously raped another woman just weeks prior. As of 2007, Dupas has been convicted of 3 murders and is a prime suspect in at least 3 other murders committed in the vicinity of the Melbourne area during the 1980s and 1990s. 8. Kathleen Folbig. The story of New South Wales woman Kathleen Folbig exposes the feminist propaganda that it is only men who are violent and evil. But for this misconception, one or more of Craig and Kathleen Folbig's children could still be alive. 36-year-old Kathleen Folbig cold-bloodedly killed her 4 children over a 10-year period for no better reason, according to her diary, than they annoyed her when they cried and cut into her time to go to the gym and to go dancing. When this evil woman smothered 19-day-old Caleb, his death was put down to sudden infant death syndrome. 2 years later, she smothered 8-month-old Patrick, and then Sarah. The coroner noticed bruises on Sarah's neck, but because of his blinkered view, did not associate the bruises with any action of the mother. Then in 1999, she killed her daughter, 19-month-old Laura. A detective began investigating. He was later to admit that his investigation was hampered by his mindset that women do not kill their children. That is a totally erroneous concept. The National Homicide Monitoring Program conducted by the Australian Institute of Criminology reveals that where children are killed by their biological parents, the mother commits 55% of the murders. Folbig was found guilty of the murders and sentenced by New South Wales Supreme Court Judge Graham Barr on 24 October 2003 to 40 years in jail. 7. David and Catherine Burney. It was a union that led to a horrific series of rapes and murders. Over 1 month in 1986, and with the help of his partner Catherine, Perth's David Burney raped and murdered 4 women and attempted to kill a 5th. Their first victim was psychology student Mary Nielsen, 22, who visited the Burneys' home to buy car tyres. Once there, she was gagged, chained to the bed, and raped while Catherine watched. She was taken to bushland where she was raped again, strangled, and buried. It was the beginning of a serial killing spree that terrified Perth. The Burneys drove around looking for their victims, who were initially trusting of the couple because there was a woman present, before abducting them and bringing them back to their home in Willagee in Perth South. Their 5th victim, Katie Moir, 17, managed to escape, leading to the Burneys' arrest. Serving 4 life terms, David hanged himself in prison in 2005. Catherine remains in prison and is never to be released. 6. William MacDonald. William MacDonald was regarded as Australia's first true serial killer. In June of 1961, the naked body of a young man was found. The body had been stabbed upwards of 30 times, with the genitals being hacked off. The location of the body was a public bathhouse, a popular homosexual hangout. Soon after, 2 more bodies were found. Each had more than 30 stab wounds as well as having their genitals cut off. The bodies were also found in public bathhouses. Later, the police received a call about a terrible smell coming from a small shop. The police could not find the owner of the shop, a young man named William MacDonald. The police broke into the shop determined to find the root of the stench. At first they were unsuccessful until they pulled up the floorboards. Underneath, the police found the body of a half-naked man. This man had been stabbed numerous times. Like the others, his testicles and penis were severed. The police discovered that the body was not that of William MacDonald. The police began circulating pictures of MacDonald, hoping that someone would see and recognise him. At a train station in Melbourne, Australia, 2 porters recognised MacDonald. MacDonald was picked up by the police, where he admitted to the 4 murders. He received a life sentence. MacDonald passed away in jail in 2015 at the age of 90. At the time, he was the longest-serving prisoner in custody. 5. Leonard Fraser. Leonard John Fraser, also known as the Rockhampton Rapist, was an Australian convicted serial killer who was jailed for the abduction and murder of 9-year-old Rockhampton girl Ciara Steinhardt in 1999. Previously having served a period in jail for rape, he was subsequently charged with 4 murders. Police found many trophies of his victims in his flat and ponytails from 3 different women, which could not be traced to any of his known victims. One alleged victim, however, Natasha Ryan, was eventually found to be alive and living secretly with her boyfriend after being missing for 5 years. In 2003, he was sentenced to 3 indefinite prison terms for the murders of Beverly Lego and Sylvia Benedetti, and the manslaughter of Julie Turner in the Rockhampton area in 1998 and 1999. At his trial, the judge described him as a sexual predator who was a danger to the community and his fellow inmates. Fraser was being held at the Wollston Correctional Centre, and after complaining of chest pains, he was taken to a secure section of the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Wollongabba on December 26, 2006, where he subsequently died of a heart attack on January 1, 2007. 4. Thomas Jeffries. His name might not be familiar now, but at the time his crimes made him one of the most feared people on the continent. Long before Australia's federation in late 1825, British convict Thomas Jeffries murdered 6 people on the idyllic island that would later be called Tasmania. After escaping from prison, the bushranger and other escapees went on a robbing and killing spree that lasted more than 3 weeks. Jeffries' killings included those he robbed, a baby, and a policeman. He was also a violent sexual offender. He was captured on January 23, 1826, and executed by hanging in jail. 3. John Wayne Glover. Over a year, beginning in March 1989, 6 elderly women, one was 60, the rest were 81 to 92 years old, died as a result of bashing with a claw hammer and ritual strangulation with the victims' pantyhose tied in a bow on the lower North Shore. Their skirts were pulled up over their heads, legs were splayed, and their shoes were placed neatly alongside their bodies. They represented both his mother and mother-in-law, though he also just hated Mosman matrons. He specifically blamed his mother-in-law for his actions. All his victims were strangers except the last one. He was also charged with attempted murder, indecent assault, robbery with wounding and assault, and robbery. He had a long history of teenage delinquency, lying, stealing, peeping Tom activity, as well as assault, both in the UK where he grew up, then in Melbourne where he worked before moving to Sydney. Described as the anger retaliatory type predator and narcissist, he struck everyone as being so normal. He was a hail fellow, well-met type and was married with 2 daughters. He was sentenced to 6 terms of life imprisonment, never to be released. His only concern was that he would not see the ocean again. On September 9, 2005, 72-year-old granny killer John Wayne Glover was found hanging from a shower rail in his jail cell in Lithgow, central western New South Wales. 2. Ivan Millat. One of Australia's and the world's most notorious killers, Ivan Robert Marco Millat, is serving life terms for the murders of 7 backpackers in New South Wales Belungo State Forest between 1989 and 1992. The travellers, which included 5 women and 2 men, came from Australia, England and Germany. It is believed Millat picked up his victims as hitchhikers before driving them deep into the forest, tying them up and either stabbing or shooting them to death, or both. He took his time with the killings and decapitated one victim. Her head has never been found. Police began investigating Millat when his name kept cropping up in tips from the police as a suspicious gun-loving person. He was arrested after an English backpacker called Paul Onions, who had escaped Millat during a robbery, identified his abductor as Millat. Millat was arrested on May 22, 1994, and a search of his Western Sydney property yielded a trove of evidence, including a part of the rifle used in the murders and the murdered backpacker's property. He is currently under treatment for cancer. 1. Snowtown Killers. The worst serial killings case in Australian history exposed a sordid killing club of 4 men in Adelaide and put a tiny South Australian town on the world map for all the wrong reasons. Over 7 years, 11 people were murdered in a sadistic murder spree orchestrated by John Bunting and his mate Robert Wagner, often with help from their cohorts Mark Hayden and James Vlasakis. The men targeted homosexuals and pedophiles. They dismembered 8 of the bodies with saws and dumped them in barrels which were found in a disused bank vault in Snowtown. Following their arrest, Vlasakis turned witness, detailing the graphic horrors of the crimes. Bunting was found guilty of 11 murders, Wagner of 10. They are serving multiple life sentences. Vlasakis was sentenced to 26 years for 4 murders. Hayden was convicted of assisting in 5 of the murders and sentenced to 25 years.
The evidence given at trial has driven me to the conclusion that both of you are incapable of true rehabilitation.
Sentencing Judge Brian Martin told Bunting and Wagner.
It is no exaggeration to say that you were in the business of killing for pleasure.
And there you have 10 of the worst Australian serial killers of all time. Australia certainly has many depraved killers and serial killers in their repertoire. A simple Google search will tell you of many. There have certainly been many, and many of them have in fact been women, so I was not surprised to see some women make it on this list. By all means, comment down below and tell me what are some Australian serial killers you've heard of. Do you recognise any of the names on this list? I'm sure many people will recognise the name of Ivan Millat. He is certainly known worldwide, unfortunately. His nephew had followed in his footsteps and has also killed people, being that he wanted to be just like his uncle Ivan. How very unfortunate. The film Wolf Creek was in part inspired by the crimes of Ivan Millat, so if you have seen that, well, you know where some of that inspiration came from. Thank you so much for listening to today's video. I hope you all have an amazing October and you keep your eyes and ears open for all the Halloween-themed content that is going to be dropping this month. Everybody keep taking care of themselves during COVID, and I wish you all the best, and until then, have a happy October.